I gotta tell you, man, Equator 2 was not what I thought it was going to be, in a good way. We initially kind of fired it up and were messing around with it on a stream a few days ago, and at first I was like, I don't know about this. However, after spending a little bit of time with it, my impressions kind of grew favorably quite a bit. And the reason why is because I found some unique features that are within Equator 2 that I think would give you a run for your money if you're kind of in the market for a new synth. I would say that for the most part, who this is for is people that are mostly interested in MPE, which is multi-polyphonic expression. However, it's not to say that you can't get some good stuff out of the sound design capabilities. And of course, the presets on their own right are they're pretty good. So this is priced normally at $250, and that's a little bit of a steep price, but considering the technology and some of the things that are within this and the 1400 plus presets that come with it, I don't think that it's quite asking too much for what it does. Now, Vital is kind of an anomaly, right? But we can't mention this without something like Vital. But the thing is that Vital is so cheap that why would you not, why would you not download something like that, especially when you can get it for free? I would say that in retrospect, the MPE functionalities and stuff that are being offered through this versus something like Pigments 2 would kind of be where you want to compare this to. And in my opinion, even though I don't think that the workflow in Equator 2 is my favorite, and there are some questionable things and functionalities that are in there as well, I definitely do think that I enjoy or would prefer using this over something like Pigments 2. And again, you can't really go wrong with synths these days as long as you do a little bit of homework. And the thing is that whatever you choose to buy, you shouldn't be disappointed with it, because these synthesizers are constantly kind of trying to keep up with each other about, what it is that they can do in XYZ, and which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But whether or not this is going to be something that's worth for you is why you're going to stick around for the rest of the video. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, well, you've already kind of seen what Equator 2 looks like. Hello. I'm going to go ahead and full screen this. Now, the thing about Equator 2 is, of course, it's made by Roli, who kind of created the MPE technology, I want to say. And by the way, thank you so much to Roli for sending me a copy of this. They reached out to me and wanted me to cover it, and I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I like doing that stuff. And sure enough, there's some cool things to talk about. So by nature, this has 6 oscillators that you can kind of turn on, or 6 engines rather, and you have a choice between wavetable, sampler, granular, and noise. The wavetable is a little bit strange because if you pull this up, by default, you're actually going to have an oscilloscope right in the middle. Now, at first glance, that might actually seem really cool to you, but the reason why I kind of have a bit of nitpicking with this is because there's no way to kind of be able to detect or to tell how to change the wavetable. Right now, we're looking at a single cycle, so there is no wavetable changing. So if I were to open this for the first time, I wouldn't know where to go and find these things, right? However, once we kind of get past that and we look at kind of some stuff that actually has a full cycle in it, like these are all single cycle as well. Let's try this one. There we go. You'll be able to see if something has an actual wavetable by checking this here. And unfortunately, the only way to kind of go in and change the wavetable position is to click on this here, open this menu, and then change through on the morph. Now, by nature, the engines and stuff that are in here, I have to say, do sound great, and you can import quite a bit of stuff in here. And so I'm in the midst of editing this video, and I just realized that there actually is no wavetable editor. So while you can import your own wavetables, you can't actually edit your own or make your own from scratch. So there's that to keep in mind. And that's kind of like a standard feature by now, right? Unless if you're Massive X. LOL. I'm just kidding. Okay, so a cool feature that is within this, that is something I talked about on Bitwig's wavetable, is the fact that if you have a unison mode that's more than one, then you can actually spread out your unison across the entire wavetable. So that means that each layer of unison is going to be playing at a different part of the wavetable, which is ultimately going to give you a more complex sound. Aside from that, you can do FM up to 2 times to this. It's not quite that modular, but 2 times is better than none, so you can get a little bit more of a complex thing, plus some ring modulation that you can also insert as well from these sources. Now, one cool thing that I want to tell you from the jump off is the fact that if you have a granular engine loaded up, you can actually start to do FM from a granular engine. You can't do it to the granular engine, but you can do it from. So if I go in here and I adjust this just a little bit to the granular mode here, then we can end up getting some interesting sounds. It's going to be kind of unpredictable because I don't have anything particularly prepared. However, you can kind of guess or imagine that kind of combining the granular aspects of something like this into something else like this would give you some interesting results. So if I click on here, pull that up a bit. You can see that it can get kind of crazy, right? Just from, messing around in that way. When you start getting into like the crazy exploration of sound design, I do think that this feature on its own is pretty crazy. So speaking of the granular mode, we have the position here and that you can kind of scan through. And you've also got a scan rate. You have your normal rate, which is kind of like your grain size, which as you can see, would be right here. Oh, sorry, the grain size is over here and then your rate is over here. However, one killer feature that I think is really cool about Equator 2 is the fact that you can actually sync your rate. And the reason why this is important is because this kind of puts it on a competitive price point against something like Portal. Because Portal, their biggest selling point, well, for one, it's a granular effect, right? But having the ability to rhythmically control your rate means that you're going to end up like having something that's usable a lot sooner. So for example, this is a kind of fresh patch or whatever, but if I change the rate on this, you'll be able to hear the grains being played back in sync. And so, having the ability to do stuff like that is pretty fun and actually very useful, especially if you're trying to create something that has like just some cool, I guess people are really into Flume, and that's something that, it's people are saying that Flume does a lot or whatever, but I don't really like to throw names out there. It's just a quick example. So the other thing that you can do that's really cool is you have this thing called sample index. And what this means is that if you upload kind of like a folder of sounds into this, then you can kind of use this as a sample selector while you're doing the grain size. Now, it's not quite as robust, I would say, as something like Bitwig sampler or whatever, because you can do like 128 samples at the same time, whereas this by nature you can do 6, but it's still pretty cool, and not everybody has Bitwig. One thing that this does have over Bitwig, however, is the fact that you can change your grain shape, which is kind of strange that Bitwig doesn't have something like that, but I mean, what can you say? So yeah, I think that's a pretty cool feature on that. You've also got some stereo width, and then you can update the pitch, and that pretty much means that it will change the way that the pitch is kind of tracked across the grains. That's kind of a hard way to explain that, but you would pretty much just kind of turn this and then listen to it. Wow. Yeah, super cool sounds, right? You can also do scan rates. You can do random positions where the thing will jump around. But man, like you don't have to go very far within this to get like some cool and at least interesting sounds right out of the box. I have no idea what I just did, but it sounded cool. So, we'll just keep moving on. So yeah, aside from that, you've also got the sampler, which is kind of basic. You just have a sample and then you can kind of change the offset, and that's pretty much it. Not that interesting, unless if you're going to do FM from a sampler, which would make more sense. And then you've also got a noise generator, which you can choose between pink, white, or crackle, and then that's pretty much it. You got some width, some density, and there's not a whole lot to it. So for the most part, I think that most of the time you guys are going to be using something like wavetable or granular, and that's perfectly fine because that's pretty much what the norm is anyways. Now, another cool thing that I think you guys are going to enjoy quite a bit is the fact that at the bottom of all of these, there is an extra filter after these sections, and it seems like there's only one filter between like a few handful of things that you can go like choose between, but you also have a formant filter in addition to the other one that is available on every single filter that's on here. This is really cool because that means that you can create some really complex, I guess, filtering stuff just from having the knobs available to you, right? And while I do think that the modulation system on this is somewhat archaic, which I'll talk about here in a second, you can pretty much quickly set up a bunch of different parameters and stuff to get like some crazy morphing sounding things, because every single filter has not only a high pass but also a low pass built in, regardless of what this is. So every engine has that, and then you've also got two main filters right here that you can do, and you can see that they are exactly the same. So before I go any further, I wanted to talk about the routing options as well, because with all these filters and cool things and whatever, like you can actually change some of the routing situations that you have in between that to kind of parallel, or you can do summed, or you can do mixed, and that's kind of where it's like both serial and parallel at the same time. And then you've got these ring mods that you can use for all the signals as well. So that's kind of cool. You have these output VCAs if you want to kind of do some feedback stuff kind of like that. And yeah, there's quite a bit with that. So we're over here now, and we've got 5 different macros, 3 macros over here. This is going to kind of mimic the architecture of the Seaboard Rise family. So over here, we've got 3 macros that kind of serve as knobs, and then we have an XY pad. And to get to that, you just hit this little thing. You can also play with the pad over here. I mean, it's kind of weird. Like I get why that is, but this day and age, I almost want to say like 8, 8 is the minimum. So yeah, over on the right side, you've got some math functionality. This isn't really something that I explore a whole lot with, but if you know about this, then you can kind of get into that. This is a can of worms in its own right. Data Broth on stream had to help me figure out what this was. However, if you are into sound design, then you can kind of look that up. If you're brand new to sound design, wondering if Equator is good, you probably won't be paying much attention to this, at least at first. In the middle, that's kind of like the big thing, right? This is how you would start to assign modulation and stuff. What you would do is make sure that you highlight one of these to where the kind of color that would be nice and neon and pretty would be highlighted. And then you have to drag over here to make sure that the arrows kind of come up. And this is probably my biggest gripe with this synth, to be honest, is that, no, I didn't read the manual. I'm very tactile, but it took me so long to figure out how to apply modulation to something. And I think like modulation in general is kind of its weakest thing, because while I do think that it does have all the modulators that you need in order to do something cool, the cross modulation between something like an LFO and a multi-mod or an LFO to an envelope can be kind of tedious. And I'll show you why here in just a second. However, just for demonstration purposes, if I wanted to set the pressure to the cutoff here, meaning how hard I push a key on an MPE device, then I can just kind of turn that up. And now whenever I would touch a key or something, it would, the harder that I press, the more that it would open the filter, if that makes sense. So if you don't feel like doing an MPE device, then you can kind of just change this stuff to standard, which is kind of some other things that you can do, pretty much just CCs, velocity, pitch, mod wheel, aftertouch, and note off. And if you don't know the difference between these two, it's pretty much the same functionalities and stuff that you have on here, not quite the same, but it's on an individual basis per note. So it means that one note can be super open filtered, but I can be playing another note at the same time that actually has a closed filter on it because of the MPE technology. And that's just like a really basic way to describe that. However, it's a really cool piece of technology. And so, you know, that's kind of why you would want to do that. But sometimes people just want a regular like MIDI keyboard or something, and you can assign all those things too. So the mod matrix is great. And the reason why is because just like Vital, this allows you to do mod remapping. However, on this, they call it a transfer function. So if you've seen Vital or you've watched my review on it, basically, if you have any kind of modulation sources that's going to a destination, then you can introduce some kind of particular bias. And so what that means is, let's say you've got an LFO that goes up and down really high. Well, what this will do is it will keep that filter movement under a certain threshold that you set based on this. Now, I do wish that I could kind of like change the timing of this, or maybe like have some more options to mess with this as opposed to just being able to create shapes. But the fact that this is introduced is still a plus. And I think that it's something that more people should take advantage of in the future. If you want to see where all of your other complex routing is, that would be here. Then you can also add modulation sources, let's say pitch 3 to source 1, and then add a new connection. And then you can kind of do that as such and change that. And yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory from there. I do also like that there's a search function in that. That's also pretty cool too. Once you get to the bottom, that's our normal modulators. We've got 5 different envelopes. We have 5 different LFOs and 2 multi-mods. So that's your multi-stage envelope that you can do. Kind of standard business there. You can draw with steps or freehand things if you want. You can also hold the curve just like that. That's all pretty standard stuff with your normal functionality of either unipolar, bipolar, XYZ. Now, where things get kind of tricky is if I wanted to LFO an LFO, I can do that. So if I wanted to grab this, normally like I can't highlight this and then click on another one because it's going to highlight that. So I have to go to this little box over here, and then I would wait till this turns into something else. And then you can start to see that I can mess with the fade or whatever. However, I can't do that from an LFO to a multi-mod or even a different multi-mod. And that's kind of where things get a little bit strange. I think the only way to do that is to go into the mod matrix and try to reset some of those parameters, which isn't that big of a deal, but it's still kind of annoying that I have to menu dive, or tab dive rather, to access some of this stuff that should be kind of like a norm, right? Now, if I wanted to kind of maybe LFO like this or so, then that shouldn't be that big of a deal. So I can just go here, and then boom. But again, it's weird. Like, just the way that this is laid out is very unnatural to me. And that's kind of one of its key drawbacks of the fact of just having everything kind of be free flowing. I don't think that the synth looks bad, but I think that it kind of shot itself in the foot with the way that some of these things are laid out, because it makes it harder to do some of those kind of like in-depth modulations. And it's weird because I think that the synth is capable of doing all these things, But at the same time, like, because you have to flip on tabs and all that, like, you can see how it's kind of held back in that nature. Same thing goes with the envelopes. If you want to kind of move in with that, you got to click on this. And so if you want to make an envelope move pitted against another one, then you would have to do that as well. Just keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and move on to the effects now. And I think that this is actually one of Equator 2's strong points. Now, between all these, you have up to 12 effects, and that might not seem very much if you're used to something like faceplant, but like faceplant, you can have multiple instances of the same effect, and I think that the effects on here are great. Now, I'm not going to go through each one and show you how it sounds or whatever, because that's just going to take way too much time. However, I will kind of point out some highlights between all this stuff, that the model distortion has a bunch of different distortion units in it. It's got a tube. Come on, it's got a tube. And then it also has a really cool EQ layout where it's just a bunch of bell curves already set up for you to do some complex kind of filter shapes that you can all modulate, which is great because that's kind of what I look for a lot. So you can do like distortion, EQ, compression, distortion, EQ, compression, distortion, EQ, compression, and like create this like super filter, so to speak, of different things. Whereas with something like Serum or Vital, like you get one instance of the effect, and while you can change the routing of it, you can't duplicate it. You can't have more than one phaser. Or if you did want to do it, you'd have to use, you know, Serum effects, but you can only use one phaser from Serum effects, and then you need another Serum effects to do another phaser, and it's just kind of like, oh man, that workflow is just so old. So aside from that though, the effects are great, and I think that the model distortion is good. I really like the EQ, the reverb sound really good. This has a grain delay, which is kind of an uncommon effect unless if you're kind of used to something like Ableton. But even then, I've seen grain delay in only a few different like instances, right? Almost every synth has like a phaser, flanger, or whatever. But with an actual synth that has a grain delay, if you don't have Ableton and you wanted something like that, this could be a really good idea for you. If you want it as a regular effect, and I think there's some stuff from Sound Toys and then also Yuhi. I think Portal has that too, but still, you know, it's still pretty relatively uncommon. Now, one cool thing that I want to point out with the effects as well is the fact that you can change the configuration, which is pretty much the routing. So you can change it from mixed to where you can kind of follow the signal of where it goes down all the way through. You can enter a feedback this way, and then it all goes to a single output, or you can change it to parallel. So you'll see where everything goes out to the same way. You can also change it to the mixed with feedback, so you've got feeding back into itself and then it goes down into that way, or you can do parallel with feedback, so you get this like super crazy thing. You have these sends over here, which should be relatively standard, and I think that's pretty much it for the most part. On the global tab, you don't really have a whole lot. It's just kind of like how you deal with legato and all that. If you are working in standalone mode, which is a feature that I think is pretty important, if you just want to jam out or something, then you can change the external or internal clock. So as far as the synth goes, that's pretty much it. It is kind of cool that all of these have different presets that you can load into them as well, which is kind of nice. But I mean, for the most part, you can kind of see, you know, if you're used to sound design and all that stuff, how things would come about. I guess the only other feature to talk about is at the bottom, you kind of have like a half functional quote unquote C-board. You can kind of change how this all goes from scale or limit max or limit the minimum in case if you're trying to like move between the parameters and stuff. But this will give you a taste about like how an MPE device will react if you were to play with one. And while I have quote unquote have a Roli C-board that's broken as heck and I'm not going to whip that thing out, I can say that even if you don't do sound design, the presets on here, which I will get to in a little bit, I'll probably just like segment off and then do some preset browsing or whatever. Some of these things are freaking great. And I have to say that some of the sound designers from Roli, like you guys killed it, man. Like really good stuff. I think that your Neuro game, I'm sorry, I mean this constructively, but I think that your Neuro game could use some work. But other than that, like as far as like your textures and stuff, man, like I am a huge fan. So before we go off into the preset world or whatever, let's just kind of summarize a couple of things. For one, the granular engine is incredibly powerful and it also sounds good. You know, sometimes like there are these granular engines that don't have like really good or high quality playback. I really like the one that's in here. Compare this one to something like Omnisphere. Like I really dislike Omnisphere's granular synth, and it's powerful, quote unquote, but it doesn't sound good to me. Sorry. I love Omnisphere, but no. The other thing is with the tempo synced scan rate, then you've got the multiple instances of the same effect. And then you've also got the FM from a granular engine, which, you know, those kind of combined together really make this like a good contender for why you might want to own this synth. And then of course, like the integration of MPE in its own right. If you already have like Bitwig or something, then I can understand why you might be on the fence about it. But even still, and like especially if you have something like FL Studio that doesn't really have a lot of modulation capabilities, it doesn't really have a great It does have one, but it doesn't have a great granular synth. I think that this kind of covers a lot of what FL is missing, so to speak. But even if you don't do sound design, I really think that you can get down and dirty on the presets and stuff. So yeah, this is for people that either want something different, are missing some of these features, of course, who maybe people that are interested in figuring out, you know, bridging the gap between combining their sound design with MPE. I know that some other synths do it, and if you have Bitwig, you can pretty much make anything MPE, but this kind of does a lot of the legwork for you because you don't have to assign the expressions and then come out and then find the CC and then make the CC into that particular expression XYZ. This kind of makes it a little bit easier. And you can also change some of the behavior of that. And you can do that in Bitwig too, but it's not quite as robust. Like on Bitwig, you have a list of like what you can change the, I guess, quote unquote bias to, whereas this, you can change the way that it behaves between whatever MPE. Yeah, I actually really like this. I think that it needs to improve on the interface. And again, that's not a knock to the designers. I don't think that it's an ugly synth, but I think that the way that it's laid out kind of holds it back a bit. The price is also steep. Right now it's on sale for $199. I think it's usually $250, but that's kind of asking a lot for something that's already out and it's like kind of has these competitions between something like Vital, right? Because that is such a accessible synth that a lot of people, especially if you're not into sound design super, are like going to be like, well, why would I spend $200 on something like this when I can just get Vital and maybe they don't really even know about granular synthesis or whatever. So I definitely think that this is worth checking out. And I think that if you do purchase this, you'll find a lot of depth to it. However, I can understand if people are kind of on the fence about not doing that and maybe saving up for something else like Phase Plant or, you know, getting Vital and then like spending, you know, the rest of their money that they normally would on this for something else like an effect or whatever, or they get Vital and Portal. Either way, it's a good buy. Either way, you know, you can't really go wrong if you're getting ready to invest that kind of money. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have for this particular video. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Let's go ahead and ship off over to the presets where I think you guys will really have some fun listening to hearing me play terribly. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.
no, 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 no.